Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Orr, and I teach instrumental music education at Wichita State University. I've always been interested in finding the best ways to practice, so interested, in fact, that I've spent a lot of time researching the subject. This is the second in a series of videos I've created with the goal of helping you learn how to practice more effectively. Today's topic is a big one. As I researched the way students tend to practice, I found that many young students didn't understand how to choose strategies that would help them learn new material efficiently and effectively. They basically just ran through their music from the top to the bottom, and the same mistakes they made on their first practice session were still happening weeks later. However, we found that effective practicers don't simply play pieces over and over. Instead, they have an understanding of how they learn, and they use that understanding to choose the most appropriate strategies to correct the problem at hand. With that in mind, our agenda for this video is to first give you a few basic rules that we know about how humans learn new skills, and then we'll take those learning concepts and use them to describe effective practice strategies. So, how do we learn? Well, there are three big ideas I want you to remember. First, how the brain builds skills, how memory is created, and how we transfer what we know to new things. First, a lot of learning has to do with the way your brain operates. This picture is actually a copy of the neurons inside your brain. Very high microscopic picture. You see, each time you decide to move in some way, nerve cells in your brain, called neurons, send signals down to a chain of other neurons that tell your muscles what to do. Each time your brain engages the same pathway of neurons to create an action, those neural pathways get stronger. But if you do things inconsistently, they don't get stronger. The point is that you'll be more apt to play something correctly if you play it correctly multiple times to create strong neural pathways. Your practice must include lots of accurate repetitions. Repetitions and accuracy are equally important. So let's get practical. We know that there are three stages you need to go through when you go from barely being able to do something to doing it without even thinking about it. First, you need to tell each muscle what to do. So if I'm learning to use a new alternate fingering, I need to tell each individual fingering what to do. For example, the clarinet has an alternate F-sharp fingering. I'm used to doing the normal fingering, but the alternate F-sharp works a lot better when it follows an F. So I have to tell each finger what to do. Instead of doing the first finger, I have to think about the thumb and this bottom side key. After a few accurate tries, I need to start noticing what it feels like as I move from F to F sharp to G and back down again. After a few accurate tries and noticing what it feels like, I need to notice how my fingers are moving as I play from one note to the next. After a lot of accurate repetitions, I begin to notice that I don't even think about it anymore. Instead of thinking individual fingerings, I just think F sharp, and every muscle moves together as one thought. Next, you must realize that you are more likely to do what you've done in the past. So, if you play a wrong note, you're strengthening the wrong neural pathway and weakening the right one. My point is that you need to play something correctly many times in a row in order to be generally sure that you're going to play it right when it counts. In fact, researchers have found that 5 accurate repetitions in a row is a good number to shoot for. They found that each repetition up to 5 does a lot to strengthen that neural pathway. More repetitions help, but not as much. Instead, they found that it works better to change things up a bit after 5 accurate repetitions and shoot for 5 more accurate repetitions. One little change can help the brain focus more on the skill that you're trying to develop. You can do that in a number of ways. For example, after 5 accurate repetitions on one tempo, you can play it 5 more times on a different tempo. Or you can change the articulation or the rhythm or the tone or the dynamics or anything that makes your brain think about the passage in a different way. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember that practice requires lots of accurate repetitions in small chunks. The next thing I want you to remember has to do with memory, and we'll look at this aria as an example. Neuroscientists look at memory in 3 stages: short-term, or what we call sensory memory, medium, or working memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory happens in that first split second, like when you meet somebody new and within 5 seconds you can't remember their name. I hate it when that happens. Your sensory memory quickly forgets things. You especially forget things that you're not really paying attention to. Your working memory is where your brain practices and rehearses information. It's this memory that makes those neural pathways stronger. That's what you would have used had you practiced the name of your acquaintance a few times in order to recall their name. Working memory is a big thing to keep in mind when practicing. The key thing to remember, though, is that your working memory can only handle somewhere around 7 plus or minus 2 things at a time. Psychologists actually call it the 7 plus or minus 2 rule. You can easily see it at work in music when you think of learning a major scale. If you remember the first time you played a D major scale, you probably thought about the D, then the E, then the F sharp, and G, and A, and B, and C sharp, and D. Each new note was a chore. In fact, it should have been, because that's 8 separate pieces of information for your working memory to chew on. It's up there in that 7 plus or minus 2 rule. However, after many repetitions of that scale, you no longer think of all the notes. Your brain simply says D major and your fingers take over like it's one thought. In this example, you see pieces of the D major scale, and if you know the scale, you can play these pieces at sight. The cool thing is that when you build those neural pathways, you can actually turn those 7 things into one thought. It's kind of like building a model that when you glue a few pieces together to make one big piece, then you glue that big piece to other big pieces that were chunked together in the same kind of way. For example, an efficient practicer would focus on these little patterns individually. Then she'd play each chunk of notes accurately enough times to make it feel comfortable, and then work out that next pattern in the same way. She'd chain them together. By building each little chunk and then chaining it to the others, she'd quickly be able to play a large piece of music with accuracy and fluency. Finally, your long-term memory is that information that you have stored in your brain that you can access. These memories can stay in your brain for years, but they can also fade over time if you don't bring them back to your working memory every now and then for some freshening up. So review, review, review. If you want to develop a strong long-term memory, it's important that you also pay attention to the key elements of whatever that thing is that you're working on, and then review it over and over every now and then. And finally, it's also important to recognize patterns, just like that D major scale. The final thing to remember about how we learn is the concept of simplification. Remember, your brain can only handle so much information at a time. However, when we practice, our brains are often thinking about way too many things, and we're unable to give our attention fully to any one thing. Remember that 7 plus or minus 2 rule. You need to reduce the number of things that you're thinking about in order to use that rule. First, you need to put your mind on the music and get rid of those extra thoughts. Then you need to get rid of those worries and unimportant aspects of music, and then keep trimming until you get down to the key element you're trying to improve. Keep it simple. There are a number of ways to do this. And my guess is that your teachers have demonstrated many of them during rehearsals. The most obvious is to take small bites. For example, if I have a difficult passage that has a dozen notes in it, I may play just the first 4 notes until I have them down as one thought. Then maybe I'd do another chunk like the first and chain them together. The slow it down trick is a great way to simplify if you do it correctly. When you use the slow it down trick, you should play only the spot in the music that is difficult. Don't overburden your working memory. Once you can play it accurately 5 times in a row, speed it up a little bit and do it again. Keep speeding it up until you're up to tempo, and then put it back into the context of the whole set of music you're practicing. Here's some other ways you can simplify. If you're having difficulty playing the notes, sound of making the note sound, or if your fingering is uncomfortable, forget the rhythm and just focus on the pitches. Or if you're having trouble with the rhythm, play it on one pitch so that you can forget the fingerings and focus on the rhythm. If even that's too hard, then don't play. Just count the rhythm until it feels comfortable. Then put it back on the instrument. If your fingerings are causing difficulty, don't play, just finger and say the note patterns till you can feel all those fingers moving as one thought. Or if ties are messing up your rhythm, take them out, re-articulate the tied note, then do it again and don't articulate, but put a breath impulse on each note, then add the tie back in eventually. Just remember to simplify and allow your working memory to focus on a reasonable amount of information. So let's review. You will learn more quickly if you use what you know about how humans develop motor skills. The two overarching ideas are repetition and the 7 plus or minus 2 rule of working memory. The more times you accurately repeat something, the stronger the neural pathways will become. And remember, don't overload the brain. Simplify what you're playing and work out little bits of a piece until they feel comfortable. Like all the little bits have become one thought. Then gradually add those little bits to other little bits to become big chunks. If you can remember these simple rules and use them in your practice, you'll be amazed at how much faster you'll learn new pieces of music. And that, my friends, is how we're going to practice smarter, not harder. I'll see you next time.